Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first ever live episode of Gathering Ground, a podcast where, with each new episode, a special guest and I explore what it looks like to thrive in the nonprofit landscape. And we also look at issues of equity and inclusion, and we look at the work of foundations. I'm Mary Morton, president of Morton Group, LLC. Morton Group is a national consulting firm that is based in Chicago and works with clients from coast to coast and everywhere in between. Our work is carried out through organizational development, research, executive placements, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And before we get started, I want to make sure you know that while we are broadcasting live today, this program will be available tomorrow on iTunes. Be sure to sign up so that you can always be notified when we have a new episode of Gathering Ground. On today's very special live episode, we are welcoming a panel of individuals whose contributions and leadership during the COVID-19 pandemic is helping to ensure support for artists across Chicago and the Illinois communities. As we all know, this is an unprecedented time, and it has affected all of us, regardless of whether our work is carried out or how it's carried out at home or in different locations. As many of us turn to work from home, individuals in the arts communities don't have that luxury and have had arts, restaurants, and retail jobs pulled out from right under them, and in many cases overnight. In addition to my work through Morton Group, I'm also a filmmaker and currently in production on 2 films. So this is very personal to me, as it is to many others. I am fortunate that I have some other streams of revenue, and I have a small business. During today's conversation, we'll hear from some people who are working at different levels to assess and create channels of support for folks. And of course, we'll have some time for questions before we close. Make sure that you send a direct message to our producer to submit a question for our panelists that may be answered during the second part of our episode. Now, we want to welcome our panelists. First, we are extremely excited to welcome Chicago's First Lady, Amy Eshelman. Amy's focus and her passion is creating interest-driven out-of-school opportunities for young adults in Chicago and across the community. Amy's past positions have included a partnership lead at the Digital Youth Network at DePaul University. She was also the past program leader for education at the Urban Libraries Council. And for 18 years, Amy served as the Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Partnerships at the Chicago Public Library. Currently, she serves as a trustee of Steppenwolf Theater and is on the board of for Children at the Crossroads Fund, which is at Francis Xavier Ward School. Michelle T. Boone is the Chief Program and Civic Engagement Officer at Navy Pier, home to Chicago Public Radio, Chicago Shakespeare Theater, and the Chicago Children's Museum. Now celebrating its centennial year, Navy Pier is the largest tourist destination in the Midwest, attracting nearly 9 million visitors annually. Prior to her position at Navy Pier, Michelle was at the City of Chicago in the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. And previous to that, she was the Senior Program Officer for the Joyce Foundation in Chicago, where she oversaw the culture program. Our next guest is Jessica Kadish Hernandez. And Jessica is a Chicago actor area and co-founder of the Chicago Artists Release Fund. Most recently, she was seen in a play at the 16th Street Theater, I should say, in Berwyn, Alabaster. She's a member of Aguillon Theater, Chicago Spanish language community theater, and as well as a company member with Second Story, where she writes, directs, and curates personal narrative performance. I should also say that Jessica is a consulting member, I should say, at Morton Group, and she's been with us since 2011. And so she's seen the organization go through lots of changes. In her current role as consulting associate, she works on assessments, executive searches, and our racial equity work. She's been a teaching artist for over 10 years, and she serves as a master instructor with the Pinnacle Performance Company. And I am pleased to welcome Claire Rice. Claire is the executive director of Arts Alliance Illinois. She leads the visioning, the development, and implementation of all the programs and initiatives for the organization, whose mission it is to fight for arts resources and policies that benefit our members, that benefit their members, and all of Illinois residents. She previously served as the National Director of Sustained Arts at Harvard University, a project providing free access to meaningful data on arts and cultural activity, And prior to that, she worked for 6 years at the federal and state level in DC as a management consultant for Accenture. So please help me welcome all of my guests. Thank you so much for joining us today on Gathering Ground for this very important conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. So we're going to get started with just a question to sort of set the context for what's happening to all of us as we go through unprecedented times in our country and certainly in our state and in the city here in Chicago. And so I want to start with you, Amy, if I might, and ask, What have you learned? Just tell us what you've learned about yourself, about the community, about our state as we go through this pandemic.
You know, that's a first of all, thanks, Mary, for bringing us together for this really important conversation. I really appreciate it. You know, that's a really difficult question because I think we've all learned so much about ourselves, our families, our community. And I sort of feel like I see what I've always known about our city as I go out and, you know, am honored and privileged to be part of how our community is supporting one another. I think a moment yesterday really brought it home to me. I was at St. Columbanus Church down in Englewood for their Wednesday sort of food delivery. Mm-hmm. And it's the community comes together, the church community comes together to volunteer, but folks were lined up around the block. But this happens every Wednesday in good times, and it's even more heightened now. But there also was this sense of pride in the community and humanity. They were cranking gospel music out of the church as folks were outside on a beautiful day getting their bags of groceries. And so it was this sort of bittersweet moment, but the coming together and the pride that the community had for each other, taking care of each other, was really an amazing moment. It happens all the time, but we're seeing it just amplified more and more.
Great, thank you so much. And Michelle, what have you learned? Just one thing that you've learned during this time.
Well, I guess the biggest thing I've learned is not to take anything for granted. And that everything is truly a gift. You know, basic things like my home, my health, the health of my family and friends, you know, my job. And so just recognizing the fragility of all of those things and seeing how, you know, this kind of temporary shutdown of just a few weeks has really shown us all how fragile our systems are and the things that we take for granted every day. I guess that's been the biggest eye opener.
Great, thank you. And Jessica.
You know, this isn't something that I didn't know before, but it's something that I think I'm relearning, is how incredibly creative and resourceful and resilient artists are, not just when they're making their chosen art form. So when an actor can't access the stage or when a singer can't be on the microphone, the same creativity that they would apply to their art is being applied now to taking care of a neighbor down the street, or going for a walk and noticing everything around you with an artist's eye, or taking care of each other in community by redistributing financial resources. That there are so many ways in which artist skills can be applied to this moment. So it's in some ways scarier and in some ways also more exciting than ever to be a part of this community that we have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Claire.
Well, in addition to learning how to really properly wash my hands and try to not touch my face, which I'm still really bad at, I feel like and we'll talk more about this, you know, I've learned so much about collaboration and what collaboration means in a really deep sense, and the beauty in it and the challenge in it and the rewarding nature of it when you persevere. And Michelle has been in a lot of that with me, and it's been really really difficult, but incredibly rewarding as well. And I think we will see the fruits of creative collaboration. We'll see the fruits of, financial and supportive collaboration. And we've yet to see the incredible growth in collaboration that will need to come out of this as a sector.
All right. Thank you so much. I think that sets a great frame for the rest of our conversation. And I want to start with you, if I might, Amy, and just ask about how it is that you and First Lady MK Pritzker came to co-chair the fund for Arts. So we're going to start by talking about the Arts Illinois.
Great. I didn't know MK at all until our spouses took their new roles on. But have since, she's since come to be a great friend and a great guidance, gives me great guidance. And we've been wanting to work on something together. And this seemed the most natural thing for us. Our mutual friend, Nora Daly, came to us with this idea. And I know that she'd been talking to Claire and some other friends of ours, Brooke Flanagan, about how we could support the arts. And we wanted this, MK and I wanted this to be a joint venture between the city and the state. We wanted this to be the thing that we were working on together. It just felt like the right move, that we shouldn't have two separate initiatives, that the arts are collaborative. And we wanted that to be sort of the message that we were sending. And so MK and I were both really, really pleased and proud to work with so many incredibly creative and dedicated people to start to push this out. And it's not really just about the philanthropy side, but it's also about how do we continue to lift the arts up in this moment and provide people with a space to for respite, to think, to be entertained, for artists to continue to create. And so that was an important piece of this for both of us as well.
Wonderful. Well, let's talk a little bit about the fund, if we might, Claire. Can you, first of all, give people a general idea too of what the organization does overall, right? Because this organization has been around for a number of years and very valuable. And I've been on the mailing list for quite some time. So tell us about Arts Alliance Illinois, and then let's talk about the fund.
Thank you, Mary. Appreciate that opportunity. Yes, we've been around for 38 years. We are an organization that really champions the role of the arts across Illinois communities. And we work to bring resources and art supportive policy to the cultural sector and with the cultural sector. We are a membership organization, so we have members from, as large as the Chicago Symphony to individual teaching artists, and educators and individual practitioners from all around the north, south, and west sides of Chicago, and of course, all around the state, from Rockford to Carbondale. So we are a very broad institution that represents a very broad range of constituents. We work a lot in Springfield, and we're working a lot with the mayor's office on the mayor's cultural policy agenda moving forward, and really representing the interests of the arts community in those conversations. With regard to this particular opportunity in this fund, we are an organization that bridges across all cultural disciplines. So we don't just focus on one piece of the arts. We're thinking about the cultural sector broadly speaking, the creative sector broadly speaking. And because of that focus and because of the statewide focus, we were sort of a natural partner to start to seed this idea. So when Nora and the First Ladies kind of started batting this around, we were happy to serve in a cat herding role around both the city and the state. We engaged some incredible philanthropic partners and some incredible grant-making partners to make the fund happen. So we're just sort of a project manager and switchboard operator. And then our wonderful colleagues, who I think are on the phone here at 3 Arts, are giving away the grants to individual artists. And then our colleagues over at the Arts Work Fund at the Chicago Community Trust are doing the grant making to organizations. So the fund has both of those two pieces so that we're trying to cover, even though there's not enough money to cover the need, of course, in the whole creative sector, which is really hurting from this. But the fund does at least endeavor to allow eligibility across the creative sector. And then I'll say that the piece Amy touched on, it for us is also really important, the kind of front end of the Arts for Illinois platform. So artsforillinois.org is the centralized platform that you can go to enjoy art, to see the richness of the Illinois cultural community, to apply for funding if you're a impacted creative or cultural organization, or to donate to the fund, most importantly in this moment, because we have had an overwhelming volume of applications, 8,000 applications from individual artists in the first week, and over 400 applications from cultural organizations that have been impacted by the crisis. So we are hurriedly fundraising every day to support and amplify the incredible fundraising that happened up into the launch. Huge thanks to the City of Chicago for their contributions, to the Walder Foundation and to the MacArthur Foundation for their leadership gifts in the space. And there's a whole host of other funders that have come in as well. And our thanks to all of them. They're all listed on artsforillinois.org. But we need more. We need those grassroots donations. We need folks to promote this to their networks. We're having artists contribute their work to that Arts for Illinois platform, so that folks can enjoy it in their homes, can be reminded of the breadth and beauty of the sector. And we're hoping that will inspire and stimulate donations to the fund.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we're going to come back and hear more details about that. I wanted to bring you in, Michelle, and ask you why you have been involved with the development of the fund and how it ties into your work at Navy Pier, of course.
Well, I was really happy to get the call from Claire and Nora Daly. Nora Daly is a longtime friend and colleague. She's on the board of Navy Pier and reached out to me. And then subsequently, also, I'm on the board for the Arts Alliance Illinois. Good. And had conversations with Claire. So I feel like I was a little double teamed.
Sounds like
to come on board and help. But I have to say, it was really very important to me, and also a bit of a lifesaver, because it got me out of thinking just about what was happening to me and my situation, and really gave me a sense of empowerment to be involved in something that was going to be helping others. So at a time when you almost feel like you're, kind of helpless and hopeless, and, what's happening to me in my life, it really helped divert the attention off of me and my situation, and got me involved in something that I really cared deeply about, and to be helpful to the community, to Chicago's vibrant arts and culture scene, to the many, many artists that populate and support the work that happens in our town, but also to extend that statewide. So it was an incredible opportunity to feel that you could do something meaningful at a time when there was so much, strife and hopelessness that was happening at the same time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Signs of hope. And Jessica, as a working actor, you saw something that needed to be addressed, and you decided to do something about it. Tell us how the Chicago Artists Relief Fund came to be.
Sure. So what happened to me and to just about every other artist I know, and thousands that I don't, starting around March 12th, was cancellation after cancellation after cancellation after cancellation. And for artists who rely on gig to gig income, an empty calendar means no income. And my personal immediate thought was, okay, I have other professions that I can turn to get myself through this time. Some folks can do that. Some folks can turn to a partner's income or family wealth, and many cannot. And if only the folks who have their own personal resources to make it through this crisis make it through the other end as artists, the entire arts community suffers and is worse for it. So as with most ideas that pop into my head, I thought, well, what if we could allocate emergency resources two folks. I said, you know what? Someone else has already had this idea. Let me look who it is. So there wasn't one in Chicago yet, but Ijeoma Oluo, the writer and activist out in Seattle, had started an effort in Seattle. And so I thought, okay, wow, this is great. Surely there's one somewhere in Chicago. I just haven't found it yet. But I dug for 2 days, March 11th to 13th, and I couldn't find it. So I put out a call on Facebook on the Friday morning, I think it was. Yeah, Friday, March 13th. And I said, here's Ijeoma's fund. This would be so great to do here. Who wants to do it? And by that afternoon, we had a working group assembled of 8 artists. We grew to 10 within 48 hours, and we launched the fund on Sunday afternoon, March 15th. So the entire thing came together in days, which in COVID-19 time is also an eternity.
Right.
And
Right.
our main concern was, how can we help our fellow artists bridge the gap between this scary time and larger institutional solutions coming through for more sustainable support.
Mm-hmm. And how's it been going? I think you've raised a significant amount of money.
Yep, we raised $50K as of this morning, 31 in our first week alone. And we allocated over the course of the past week our first round of funding. It was to 143 artists in 49 zip codes, 1/3 of whom identify as LGBTQ+, and 2/3 of whom identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And the first round was about 27,000. So based on where we are now, we're looking to raise another 17 to hit our second round, which is about $40,000 for about 200 artists.
That's wonderful. Congratulations. And what we wanted to do today was to show a number of different ways that people can support artists, right? And there's something that we can all do. I think that's really important to remember during COVID-19. And that's one of the things that I think I have been really just happily surprised by, is how many people want to help and want to do something. And this has given them an opportunity, right? Some place to put those ideas. When we think about the Arts for Illinois Fund, who are you seeing come forward as you start to go through the applications, Claire? What areas of the arts, or is it just really across the board?
It's fairly broad based, and our colleagues at Three Arts and Arts Work Fund are in the weeds, bless them, of managing all of the overwhelming volume of applications at this point. But we are seeing fairly good representation from artistic disciplines. I think the highest proportion on the individual artist side were from the visual arts, and we haven't seen as many from dance. So second round, we'd love to see more of you dancers out there applying. I
hope everyone heard that. Dancers.
These relief funds starting on May 4th. But we've really done some targeted outreach to communities that we haven't been hearing as much from. I think that because a lot of the three organizations are Chicago based, there has been less of an application volume from around the state, and we want to work on that as well. And we're working on zip code representation, still not exactly sure where folks are coming from. We will know in terms of the analysis shortly, but that's a manual process, and again, thank you to our colleagues at Three Arts for doing that manual analysis. We'll be able to answer that shortly. But we do have also good representation in terms of Alana applicants as well in both funds, less so on the organizational side. So we'd like to see also increased numbers of organizations led by serving people of color on the organizational side.
Can you just, for those of us who don't know what Alana is, I do,
but sorry,
can you want to explain what that is?
Yes, a different term for people of color, African American, Latin American, Native American, Asian American.
Yes, absolutely. And that's wonderful to hear. And Michelle, as you think about how this work, the fund, do you think that it's going to impact how you do work when you get back to Navy Pier? Do you think that this will have an impact?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I hope the impact that it has is that the people that it's intended to support are still around. and still able to create their work. We partner and collaborate with so many independent musicians, artists, arts organizations that I hope this fund is able to give some relief and to provide, kind of that gap that people need until they're able to reopen their doors and get back to work. So that's the thing that I hope happens. I'm looking at some of the comments on the chat, and I just, we've been saying a lot about arts for Illinois and artists, but the fund is really intended to support the creative sector. So it's not just limited to visual artists. It also is available to dancers, musicians, wig makers, costumers, choreographers, directors. So it really does cover everyone. And so, just wanted to make that point when we say arts, we're talking about the entire sector and all that it encompasses. And this isn't about just resources limited to visual arts, at least with the Arts for Illinois Fund.
Okay, wonderful. And Amy, you and NK Pritzker have already helped to raise an amazing amount of money. As you were thinking about the fund and talking to folks, it sounds as though people were very excited to get involved and to do what they could to support it. You're muted, Amy. Yeah. No. One more. There you go.
There we go. Sorry. I was trying to be considerate of my colleagues here. It's been incredibly encouraging, and of course, we've got such an amazing philanthropic community, and as I've made calls, you learn so much about what they're doing other than, just their regular responsibilities, but they're helping this theater that they already support, or this music venue, or these this dance company. So we're getting a lot of information of, I'm already helping these people, which is amazing, and that's what we want. This fund is incredibly important, and I think they understand that. And they also, I think, much like we've all been talking about, understand how much they've missed being in community with the arts, being, together in a dark room watching a play or listening to some music, and understand how important the arts are going to be to our recovery. And as we think about the vision of Chicago and what Chicago is going to look like when we get on the other side of this, how important it's going to be for the artist's voice and that creativity to be part of that process, and how we can continue to support folks to get through this moment, so that they can participate and they can be part of how Chicago looks and feels going forward. So I think they understand that, yes, we need the art for art's sake, but we also need it to be part of what our city looks like moving forward, and that we want artists and the creative sector to be part of that conversation.
Exactly. And I'll just add in that when I got involved with Chicago Foundation for Women here, one of the things that some of the arguments against a women's foundation was that, well, if we give to you, what do we do about the other organizations that we support?
Right.
And our response was, think of it as a mutual fund. Really, we believe that there's strength in numbers, and we can do so much more when we come together, whether it's through the Chicago Artist Relief Fund or through the Arts for Illinois Fund. There's so much more we can do when we work together, right? So exactly right. An individual donation is really going to be leveraged in a very different way when you make a contribution to either one of these funds or any of the other opportunities that people have available. We're going to start looking at some of your questions in just a moment. And before we do that, I just want to hear again from Claire about how long will the fund be in effect?
So we've had to put a temporary pause on the individual artist side to let our friends at 3 Arts breathe for just a minute so they could survive and process those 8,000 applications. And so that fund, or that piece of the application, will reopen on May 4th.
May 4th?
Yes, and then we will also have a pause upcoming for organizations, but that application is still open through April 15th. And then again, that process will pause for processing, more fundraising, and then reopen on May 4th. I mean, we want to do this as long as we can. We know the need is vast. And we will absolutely continue to have successive rounds of grant making as long as there is funding available to do so. And we are certainly absolutely, from an equity perspective, trying to avoid this first come, first served, out the door and done mentality. Absolutely. That is, I think, disheartening and discouraging. And we're trying to avoid that at all costs. So we're working our tails off on getting some more resources to all of you out in the field, and we will keep going. I mean, the thing that a couple of donors have commented on is that it took a great deal of work over the last couple of weeks, not quite as nimble as Jessica in terms of pulling all these parties together, but we've built this infrastructure now, so it's ready, right? We can, if we have to do this again in the fall or some other time for any unfortunate, God forbid, circumstance, we can reactivate this if we need to. So it's actually a real credit to all of the funders who came together to in the city and the state to believe in this, because now we have this infrastructure available to support the sector in a whole new way.
Excellent. Well, one of our questions, and we're going to move into our Q&A here, is how do any of you, and this is for any of you, really see the COVID-19 pandemic impacting the arts over the long haul? What do you think some of the impacts will be? I mean, to your point, Claire, we don't know what's going to happen in the fall, and some of the models are saying that, it may come back again. What do you think, though, in the immediate? I would say, since people are thinking that maybe sometime during the summer they may be able to get back to arts activities, what do you think this is going to mean for the arts community? Michelle, you want to try that?
Well, I think it's not just limited to the arts community. I think to so many sectors,
absolutely.
It's just going to be devastating. I was participating on a call last week with Americans for the Arts, which is our nation's, representative advocacy agency. And, at any given moment, the arts sector, the creative sector will have about 35-40% of the organizations operating at a deficit. And depending on how long this lasts, we could see a third of our sector gone. If you have a deficit and you don't have the strength of a board with deep pockets that can help you through this, or for whatever reason you may not qualify for some of the federal programs that are available, or the money just may come too late. This will have a tremendous impact, I think, on nonprofit sectors that serve not just the arts, but what it's doing to the food industry and the service industry. I think we're going to be reeling from this for years to come. However, having said that, I think what also will come out of this is a demonstration of incredible strength and resiliency.
Fortitude.
And also, I think some incredible work that, artists are always the first ones to kind of respond to trauma and through creation. And so I think we're going to have a wave of creative works that are going to be made in response to what this is happening. The way that artists are going to connect with one another can really yield some very beautiful, moving work that we'll all get to enjoy for a really, really long time.
Absolutely. Jessica, what have you seen from your friends who are working actors, and what have you thought about yourself in terms of the future of the arts community?
Lots of big giant question marks, lots of swinging back and forth between days of, yes, I'm going to use this time to be reflective and productive and make progress on something artistic, swinging back and forth between that, and I'm just going to breathe and make it through the day, and that's going to be enough. And again, Michelle, like you said, I don't think that's limited to artists or to our sector. That feels like everybody right now. But I opened up my Facebook feed just before getting on this call, and the top post was about fall shows starting to be canceled. The next post was about an organization that's concerned about the survival of its model long term. And I stopped scrolling after that because that's most of the posts on my feed right now. So
was that an arts organization?
it was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And Amy, what are your thoughts about the future of the arts community as we come out of at least this first round of COVID-19?
Yeah, I think Jessica and Michelle have just, talked about it very eloquently. And, but I do think about my friend Martha Lavey, who used to talk about the arts as a public square. And, I think that's why it's so critical that this support gets to our art sector so quickly so that we can continue to support them, because I think, again, we're going to need their voices and we're going to need them to bring us together to help us make sense of it. And so I've been thinking a lot about that and what that's going to look like and what the work is going to look like when we get out of this moment. And I just hope, and both Lori and I are doing whatever we can to make sure that we can keep as many of our arts organizations and artists viable during this time. It's gonna be tough though, and our cities, I don't think our city's ever gonna look the same.
No.
I don't think we're ever gonna feel the same.
Right.
But again, how do we take this moment to move forward and think about what our city can look like in the future with our artists at the center of that conversation?
Okay. And Claire, for you, we're getting, I know you talked a little bit about the diversity of the applicant pool, but we're getting a few questions about that. So I just want you to speak to it. And in particular, I know you said you'd like more applications from people right outside of the city per se. So can you talk about the geographic diversity and the kinds of groups that you're looking forward in this next round?
Yep. So I think right now we have about 7% of our applicants from outside the Chicagoland area on the individual artist side. And I'm going to have to look up the statistic for the organization side because it's not directly in front of me. It might be slightly higher than that, but it's a very, very low percentage in both categories, and I think that's as much a perception issue that as anything else. And I think we need to just work on our communications in that space. Work with our local arts network. Make sure local arts agencies around the state are connecting this opportunity with their constituencies, and let that and really focus on that for the second round. And just to follow on to the last thread as well. I mean, the Arts Alliance is not just focused on this fund right now. I think to all of the previous points, we're going to have to be looking at systemic policy solutions to get people back to work in new contexts. And I think that's not about isolating artists in that conversation. It's not about segmenting the arts sector. It's about making sure that we are integrated into the fabric of those solutions across the city and the state. And we'll be, thrilled to work with the mayor and the governor on thinking and frankly at the national level on thinking about what that looks like.
And Esther is on the call, and she said that there about 9% of the applications are from artists downstate.
Oh, so great!
There's your number.
9. That's excellent. Thanks.
There's your number. Yes, right. Okay. So again, we want to encourage more applications from around the state. And it's for artists across the board, right? Those who are behind the scenes, those that are on stage, photographers, writers, across all those different formats. It's really important that all of you apply to this fund. When we think about city and state funds, we have a question about whether or not, or what is the timeline, I should say, for city and state funds to be released. Does anyone know anything about that with regard to the arts community? I'm just going to look. If you know, you can give me a wave, and if not, yes, Claire, where are you going to go?
What do you, could you just clarify the question a little bit?
Okay, the question is, do we know when city and state funds will be released? That is the question, and I assume
So
that's
the city has contributed a
Mhm.
significant amount to this particular fund. So those funds will be released as folks apply.
Mhm.
The state has contributed a modest amount as well. So that's all wrapped into the fund in this moment.
Mhm.
And then we are also, as many of you already know, the NEA received $75 million, the National Endowment for the Arts, at the federal level. So there are opportunities for folks to do direct applications to the National Endowment for support, as well as there will be money coming through at the state level through the State Illinois Arts Council agency. Very soon. They just released the guidelines yesterday and are hoping to have that money out the door very shortly. So we'll know more about that process, and the Alliance and the Illinois Arts Council agency will trumpet that opportunity widely as well when they figure out what the pathway will be to distribute those funds. They're looking at a number of different possibilities there.
Wonderful. And here's
And-
another someone. Go
Mary,
ahead,
just to
Amy.
follow up, I just wanted to give a huge thanks to Mark Kelly and the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. Commissioner Kelly and that team has gotten incredibly creative in a non-create, a difficult environment, which is the city budget, to be able to get some money pushed out to folks during this moment. So I just wanted to thank and recognize DKs for the work that they're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And here's another figure for you, because Marcia Feston is also on the line.
Thanks, Marcia. They've got
And 21% of the applications that they've received at the Arts Work Fund are from around the state. So
perfect. Thank you, Marcia. Thanks for saving me.
That's wonderful. I had actually an actor who works with us at Morton Group, another actor, other than you, Jessica, who asked if something, if you were working in a play that was closed as a result of COVID-19, is there any support for someone in that situation? And I said, I would ask. Is that someone who would be able to apply for the fund? Clear?
Oh, for certain. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, there's your answer.
I didn't know if that was to me or to Jessica. I bet they're eligible for Jessica's funds too.
Oh, no. Yes, absolutely. For either one of these funds, you can apply. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to keep going with our questions here. Let's just see. I'm just scrolling through. We have a lot of questions, and I'm trying to make sure we can get to as many as possible here. Our next question is, okay, let's see. When the money, how soon, well, let's say this, what is the turnaround time? I know you've been inundated with applications. So what is the approximate turnaround time for people putting in an application and then hopefully receiving some either just word that it's been received or actually receiving money? Do we have any sense of that timeline? And again, I know you've been inundated at the very beginning of the fund, and hopefully that'll level off in some ways, but most likely not.
Jessica's process is probably a lot faster than ours.
Yes, so we'll come and ask you, Jessica, but let's start with you.
I'll let her chime in next. In terms of the Arts for Illinois Fund, the 3 arts piece, the portion for individual artists, are hoping to turn around applications within 10 to 15 days, approximately. Application close to check in the mail, or check out the door rather. I don't think they're doing checks in the mail. Actually, I think there's a faster process than that. But they and Esther, you can correct me too if I'm misspeaking. But in terms of the Arts Work Fund process, that is slightly longer. The application has to go through the Chicago Community Trust portal, so the time frame is a bit beholden to that process. But we're hoping within 30 days, more or less, on that side.
Wonderful. And for the Chicago Artist Relief Fund, Jessica?
Yeah, we're looking at about about 2 weeks of a turnaround time from application in to check in the mail. Again, that's about as long as we've existed at this point. So that's why our first round is already out. But I wanna call back to something, Claire, that you said about a thoughtful and equity-based approach as opposed to first come, first serve money out the door. We could have done it faster had we taken a first come, first serve approach, but it was really important to us to have the application open for at least a couple of days and then to apply an equity lens in a team with multiple eyes on each application as we went through and made our funding decisions.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And again, we have some stats coming in from Esther. Thank you very much, Esther, that about it looks like of the individuals that have applied through 3 Arts, a large majority of them identify as people with disabilities, which is extraordinary. And 50% are people of color. So really wonderful. And Esther also wanted to make sure, again, that we talk about, and I think, Michelle, you mentioned this as well, that artist is really broadly defined. This is broadly defined. We're just not talking about theater. We're talking about teaching artists. We're talking about photographers, writers, dancers, musicians, and all the people that help to make art happen. So I think I actually have a friend who's a wig maker for Chicago Opera House. And so it is available to everyone who's in this category. That's very important. And I'm just going to look here at a note because Esther has lots of information.
Mary, while you're looking for the next question, I just wanted to remind people that well, I know we're here to talk about the Arts for Illinois Fund, but there are a number of resources that are available for artists and arts organizations. And I would encourage people to tap into all of them. DCASE has done a great job of compiling a list of resources for artists and arts organizations as a direct result of COVID-19 on their website. Forefront has a whole listing of resources available across the state and even nationally. There was a new Artist Relief Fund, a national fund that was just announced and launched yesterday. So, and many foundations, the Wallace Foundation in New York, while it's based in New York, it's compiling a list of national resources available for artists and arts organizations. And so I just don't want people to be discouraged by the limitations of the funding that's available in Arts for Illinois. We're working really hard to secure additional funds for that, and we'll continue to do so. But there are other resources too. And so to just remind people that a lot of folks across the country are working to try and bring some relief to the sector. Okay.
And I'm one of the questions was about when money will actually get into the artist's hand. And Marcia has decided to go out and say that they're really trying to get money into at least maybe this first wave somewhere in late April. That's what they're working toward. Yeah.
I think they'll inform folks by late April is the hope, and then
the check will be there in the next month. Okay. So, exactly. All right. So again, just to be clear, ideally, you will hear about whether or not you're going to receive any kind of support, and then you will get the money a few weeks later, right? Correct. And I think it's important for people to keep in mind that you are literally building the plane and flying it at the same time.
Correct.
so there's lots of pieces, lots of moving pieces. And if dates shift, please don't be surprised by that. It is just really important that the train keeps moving, so to speak. And all of the resources that you just mentioned, Michelle, we'll follow up with you, and we'll put that on your website. You may have some of this already on your website. Is that correct, Claire?
For sure. So we've actually been doing policy briefings to help people understand, particularly the federal legislation that has come through, which is actually, in terms of scale, one point of clarification: the NEA money will be restricted for folks who've received an NEA grant in the last 4 years. So just a point of clarification on the NEA dollars. But in addition to those NEA 75 million, which is very small for the broad breadth of the United States, these small business loans that folks are
Mhm.
applying for, the extension of unemployment benefits to gig workers and to contract employees, even though I know that's a bit of a mess right now because they're not ready for the volume of applications that they're
Right.
receiving on the unemployment side.
Right.
But the state, we're going to be pushing the state of Illinois on that for sure, to
Mhm.
make sure that all of you who are independent contractors can get those applications in as needed. But we are actually, each week diving into a different piece of that federal legislation at the Arts Alliance. All of that is available on our website in terms of the webinars, and then we are also developing FAQs that are specific to Illinois and Chicago, so that go through the different application processes, both for independent contractors, nonprofit organizations, and for-profit organizations. So come to our website for sure. We're not the only game in town. There's lots of great information out there, but we are trying to cut through the noise a little bit,
Right.
and make stuff that's specific to the cultural sector and creative sector for Illinois.
Wonderful. And I'm hearing from our friend Matt Nielsen, who has just let me know that artsrelief.org was in fact launched yesterday, to your point, Michelle. And so it's up and running. So artsrelief.org. You should check that out as well. They apparently are going to fund or have funded about $10 million in $5,000 grants. And I want to make a correction earlier. Out of the 8,000 applications that have been received through the Arts for Illinois Fund, 500 of them, and someone was very kind to do the math, that's about 7% of the applications are from folks with disabilities. So again, lots of room for growth in all areas. And certainly, as Clara said, from around the state, we really want to see representation from around the state. That's very important. And here's another note from Esther. For the first round of funding, they will have about $1.3 million to distribute, and then they will refuel and open the application portal for round 2. So that's the plan from the arts, from three arts. And when we think about the next steps, right, for the arts community, if there was some piece of advice you could give someone who, this is what they've decided to do, and we couldn't see this coming. What would you offer to them in terms of sort of keeping the faith, if you will? And I'm going to ask you, Amy.
Well, I just want to, I guess in kind of an answer to that question, say that Claire and Marcia and Esther and everybody, I think, took this on and was so incredibly open and flexible, and throughout, thought outside of the box, and has just jumped in. And I think that's been incredibly hopeful, and Lori and I are so grateful for that. Not having planned for this moment. And Jessica, you probably never thought you would be doing this 2 months ago, 3 months ago. But that, been so willing to say, yeah, this is what we used to do, but we can't do that anymore if we're going to keep our arts sector vibrant and alive and working and supported during this moment. And, I think that's been incredibly hopeful, and that to have these kinds of advocates in our city and these kinds of people working has been I think a great thing to see, and we really, really appreciate it.
Michelle, what would you?
Well, one thing I've been trying to tell myself is just to remember that we will get past it, that this will end. We have no idea what the new normal is going to be, but to allow ourselves to get to the point to where we're thinking about how then might we fit into the new normal. And so if things are going to be dramatically changed forever in the way that people experience art or make art or connect with art, how then do I push myself to think differently and more broadly, more creatively, more imaginatively about how to still be in the game in this new way. And so it's not about holding on to the past, but freeing myself to let it go and then roll with whatever's coming next. And to just roll with it and to be a part of it, however that gets defined. Because I think, artists are always going to create and people are always going to need it. And so whatever the new normal is for society or how we think about our lives are going to be, it's going to be there. And I want to be there as a part of it. And so just opening myself up to whatever that looks like, however that can be, and to let go any past preconceived notions about what was, but embracing what is and what will be.
I love it. Jessica, what are you telling yourself?
There is so much wisdom in this city about how to survive when there's not a system in place yet, how to take care of each other, how to create during difficult times. And a lot of that knowledge exists among folks, communities, organizations who have been traditionally marginalized. And as we've been having increasing conversations about equity in the arts sector in general over the last several years, this moment of crisis strikes me as having such possibility for real radical transformation of a more equitable arts landscape in Chicago. And I would encourage, everyone on this call, no matter what your position is, to follow Michelle's lead of thinking more imaginatively and more creatively about what is this going to look like on the other side and how can it be more equitable when we come through it together.
Wonderful. And we have a couple of questions for you, Claire, as we wrap, but I would love to know your feelings on this as well. The amount of the grants coming through, someone has asked just a little clarification about how much people will be able to receive.
So on the individual artist side, the grants were going to be $1,500. And then on the organizational side, they will range from $6,000 to $30,000, and that will be dependent on budget size. That's all outlined on the Arts Work Fund's site when you go to apply.
Excellent. And then with regard to what are you thinking with regard to the new normal and how we continue to make art and support art in this new world?
I mean, I think Jessica and Michelle, took all the words out of my mouth, but in terms of centering creativity, centering equity, and I think I would just go, a step beyond that. I think it means centering artists and the reason that we do this work, and the reason that we in the way in which I really hope that we will value our sector in a whole new way, that
Absolutely.
people will come out of this feeling all of the Netflix and music that they survived on, through this crisis, and recognize that in a new moment. And I also think it's really important to remember, and I think this is something that is something we're talking about it in different circles, but artists are human beings. They're not special snowflakes that are like off creating in a vacuum. We're not funding work. We're not funding paintings. We're funding rent and food and healthcare. I mean, these are just basic human needs. And so the arts can't be segmented into its own conversation. We have to talk about the arts as part of larger funds, as part of other efforts. Like, it has to be an integrated conversation. And it's great that we're doing this targeted thing to make sure that we recognize the role of artists, but we've got to broaden out the conversation as well.
Absolutely. Art saves lives, without a doubt. Well, believe it or not, it's 5:00 and we're going to wrap. I just want to make sure that everyone knows, if you have signed up for this podcast, you will receive a lot of materials. We're going to bundle all of the information that's been left in the chat room, and we're going to make sure that you can receive that. Lots of really good information to share. All of these websites that you've heard will have ongoing updated information, in particular Arts for Illinois. And the Chicago Artists Relief Fund will be taking applications again, as will the larger fund. We want to thank our guest, Chicago's First Lady, Amy Eshelman. And I just want to take a point of privilege, since I am the host, and say that I think I speak for a number of people, that we are so happy we live in Illinois. And I'm really happy that I live in Chicago, and I really appreciate the leadership of Mayor Lightfoot. I can't say that enough, and so I'm just going to say that now. Thank you very much. And thank you for being here, Amy. We really appreciate it. Michelle Boone, Jessica Cadish Hernandez, and Claire Rice, thank you so much for joining us on Gathering Ground. Thanks to everyone who is listening and watching. Again, we will have this available as soon as possible tomorrow on iTunes. You go to Gathering Ground, just look for us on iTunes, and we'll have this particular recording, and we will also put together resources and make sure that they'll be on the mortongroup.com website. Again, you can go to Arts for Illinois and look for this information as well. But keep engaged. We have a lot of work to do, really important life-saving work to do. Thank you all for joining us today. And what can I say except stay at home and wash your hands. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.